All right, so welcome everybody to the FITSNews studio. A very special guest today, one that multiple members of the legislature have been eagerly anticipating because they've been totally unable to defend their system of justice, which they're in charge of, by the way. The legislature appoints judges in the state. We're going to talk about that. Alexandra Benevento. Allie, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Did I say it right?
You got it. You got it right.
Southern boy said it right?
You did.
How often does that happen?
Half and half.
But you go by Allie.
Allie's fine, yes.
So we can call you Allie.
Absolutely.
Before we dive into all this stuff, Allie, just tell us, nickel tour, who are you? Where are you from? How'd you get here?
Sure. Born and raised in Western New York. Go Bills. Came to South Carolina just before I went to law school. Went to USC, School of Law. Met my husband, who is a Columbia, South Carolina native. I like to say he trapped me here, but in reality, it's been great. I've been here for a long time now. I enjoy it. We have 2 girls together. We raise our girls here, and this is home now.
Nice. It's a big Columbia fan. So wasn't too
in
much
the wintertime. I like Columbia in the wintertime.
Right.
This is my time right here.
All right. Well, I like your fall. You got the fall green rocking. So
Thank you.
Did I know that before you came in?
You did not.
So I'm already busted. Before we get into the judicial debate, which is obviously very important, people need to hear different perspectives on it. I wanted to talk with you briefly about the Cheer Incorporated scandal. You just filed a major lawsuit, 2 actually.
2.
Tell us a little bit about where that case is right now.
Sure. So last week we filed a second lawsuit in Memphis, Tennessee on behalf of 2 John Does. This time, as you'll recall, we have our amended suit pending in Greenville with 9 individuals there, a mixture of Jane and John Does. Where it stands right now is we are still talking with survivors of sex abuse within the cheer community, and we're hoping to file some additional lawsuits in other places. But right now our focus is, of course, on our Jane and John Does in Greenville and in the Tennessee lawsuit, looking, again, to expand that into other states. But our focus is on getting justice for those survivors of sex abuse.
And this is just the start of this sort of legal campaign against, and it's not just against individual abusers, is it? Tell us a little bit about the defendants.
It is not. So anybody who has spent any period of time looking into the cheer industry, I'm going to call it an industry because that's really what it is. It's a sport, but it's also a business, especially in this instance. So Varsity Brands owns a number of entities that basically control the cheer world. Everything from the type of sneakers and uniforms that these kids wear, all the way up to having control of the entity that is supposed to provide the governance for the industry itself, safety standards, reporting. And so that is all controlled by Varsity. And so our focus is to shed light on how Varsity and its subsidiaries created a culture that enabled and perpetuated sexual abuse of children, and that they did that while still profiting from these children participating in the cheer industry, and that it has been a cycle of abuse and profit for decades.
And it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, correct?
It's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
And you guys are targeting not just Varsity and these oversight agencies, but some of the financial institutions.
Yes. It was purchased by Bain Capital a few years ago. I believe it was $2.6 billion. And we believe that they ought to be held accountable as well.
How did they not know this was happening when they made that purchase? It's a trick question, isn't it?
That is a trick question that I'm going to be very cautious in the way that I answer it. It would be very difficult for us to believe that they did not have some type of knowledge when they made that purchase.
Hence their appearance as a defendant.
Correct.
And this is a RICO case too, is it not?
It is.
Tell us, just some of our readers are familiar with that from the Murdoch discussion, but tell us briefly a little bit about RICO.
Sure. So again, our allegations in this complaint are that from the top all the way down, that there was a concerted effort on behalf of coaches, gym owners, the oversight agencies, Varsity, Jeff Webb, working together in an organized way to create an atmosphere where they were accepting money from these children's parents for them to participate in cheer, promising safety to these athletes, promising a safe environment to these parents who were entrusting their children, but then creating an atmosphere not only where the abuse could take place, but once they knew abuse was taking place, they were working very hard to protect the brand, right? To protect their profit margin. Because what happens if it gets out that gyms are unsafe or coach so-and-so is an abuser and he's been moved from gym 1 to gym 2? Well, everything leads back to varsity, right? Everything's under that varsity umbrella. So it's bad for business. Child sex abuse is bad for business, right? And if it's bad for business, they could potentially lose money. And so the allegation is that they created an atmosphere where this was allowed to continue. They protected themselves. They protected their profit margin, all at the expense of children. Meanwhile, dozens and dozens of children were being sexually, physically, emotionally abused. And they did nothing about it.
You talked about that revenue stream, obviously coming from the parents, but some of the individuals accused of abuse are, I guess they call them cheerlebrities, who are very well known within the industry, who are also bringing millions of dollars to varsity. Is that correct?
That's right. So they are putting these cheerleaders, these athletes, on a pedestal and giving them this celebrity or cheerlebrity status. These young people are on social media promoting themselves, promoting the brand. A lot of them are varsity ambassadors. They'll have the little link on their social media account that says, click here and purchase whatever. We can only assume that they're getting something in exchange for that. You'll see varsity, USASF, these other entities liking and sharing and on their posts, and they are promoting these athletes to try to recruit younger athletes to have somebody to look up to. And what we found in our investigation is that oftentimes, look at Jerry Harris. He was a cheerlebrity. Look at Nick Frizzell that we just named in our Tennessee lawsuit. He was a cheerlebrity. That they are using these athletes and their status to entice younger athletes to participate, further in the sport, to get close to them, to look up to them, to trust them. And that's how that cycle of abuse starts, with that invitation for trust, that invitation for adoration. These are people they look up to. Again, like in the cheer world, they're celebrities. It seems kind of silly to somebody like you or me, right? Like, who cares? These kids care. It's a big deal. It's their whole lives. And so when they see somebody who is like a god in their sport, and all of a sudden that person starts paying them attention or giving them compliments or giving them adoration, they think that, like, oh my God, wow, this is really special. And that's how that creepy cycle of trust that leads to abuse begins oftentimes.
That attention is intoxicating.
Yeah.
Then if that doesn't work, there are actual intoxicants involved in this case, correct?
That's right.
Allegations of
drugs, alcohol. And I'm not just talking about marijuana. We have heard stories about ecstasy, mushrooms, cocaine, pills.
Wow. Well, you were gracious enough to appear on our podcast, Cheer Incorporated, our second episode. By the way, thanks again for that.
Sure.
But I wanted to just touch on something briefly. You mentioned during that appearance, you talked about why this case matters to you and how it's personal to you, and you shared some things that you just told me a moment ago that you'd never shared before. Tell us. Tell us a little about that. I outed myself on your podcast.
No, so I'm a survivor, victim, whatever word you want to use, of childhood sexual abuse. And so having that experience, I believe, puts me in a unique position. I can't empathize with every aspect of these survivor stories. My abusers, plural, were family members, immediate family members. And so I don't have that coach or that power dynamic in the same way, but it is still, the abuse of a power dynamic within a family. So I believe that my experience gives me a unique opportunity to feel empathy for these young men and these young women, and to be able to speak to them from a place of understanding that maybe somebody else with an outside perspective does not have the ability to do. And it was really important for me to kind of put that out there. Is scary. I don't know if scary is the right word, but just, people feel some kind of way when they hear that, or they might treat you differently after they hear that. But, at the end of the day, what this is about for me personally is accountability, justice and doing the right thing. And for so long, so many people in this industry have been not just allowed to do the wrong thing, and not just the wrong thing, okay? Like, stealing, lying, cheating, those are the wrong thing. These are people who are sexually abusing, forcibly raping children. That's been allowed to continue. That's been facilitated, and it's wrong. And so to me, helping these individuals have the courage, the bravery, the fortitude to come forward, to tell their stories, and do so in a space that hopefully they feel safe doing, because that's what we want them. We want them to feel safe, and we want to make them safe. That's really what this is all about. It's really important because I think, as I told you before, there will be a reckoning. I am looking forward to it. Actually, I can't wait. And I'm excited to be a part of that. I'm humbled to be a part of that. And I want these young men and women, the ones who have come forward, to know that they're safe, and that we'll do everything that we possibly can to make this safe for children moving forward. But also that they can find healing in coming forward and telling their story. It's not always going to be easy. But I think that in the end, it's the right thing to do. It may not be the right thing for every individual, but I would encourage anybody who's had that experience to come forward and know that there is a team of people, Jen, for example, who will listen to them. There's a team of people at my office who will listen, and to the extent that they need the comfort of knowing that somebody has in some way been in their shoes, I can offer that. And this is important to me. This is personal to me. This has been all-consuming, but in a good way. Like, it has lit a fire in me to say, this is going to stop. It has to stop. It has to stop for these people who have been harmed. It has to stop for the kids who are still in it. And it has to stop so that this can be safe moving forward.
It's amazing watching so many of these people come forward. But one of the things that I've noticed in hearing these people tell their stories, they talk about the process of coming forward. They talk about the range of emotions they feel at different steps in the process. When you decided to tell your story, did you go through some of that yourself as far as?
So I've never told my story publicly. Yes, I just joked that I outed myself on your podcast, that I said for the first time in a public setting that I had been victimized by childhood sexual abuse. So, in a way, I've never come forward and told my story. There are members of my family and people that are close to me that know some of the details. But this is different. This is different because this is an industry-wide problem. And there are people out there who may have victimized one John Doe, and that John Doe doesn't realize that there are 12, 14, 20, maybe 100 others that this one person has also victimized. And so this is about stopping a pattern of behavior. This is about stopping not just one person or a few bad apples. This is about stopping a culture of sexual abuse. And the power to make that change, the power to stop these people, and the power to stop the entities that are profiting from this, that power lies in the hands of our Jane and John Does. That power lies in the hands of these survivors. And so for these kids who have so long been powerless or had their power taken away, they should know that they now have all of the power. They have all the power to stop it, and we're going to help them do that.
A lot of them are feeling that power too. That's one of the amazing things we've seen over the last few weeks in the aftermath of the rock star Scott Foster thing, is this thing has turned into not just a South Carolina story, but a national story. We've seen a lot of people seizing that power. And
that's right.
Allie, thanks to you and your team for all the work you're doing to help them do that. We're talking about victims.
Yes.
We're talking about accountability, which naturally leads into the subject that we wanted to speak about. Now, I want to rewind this a little bit, because you have shared critiques of kind of my take on this, which, again, I've been a broken record for years on South Carolina's judicial branch. And again, if you read FITSNews, you're very familiar. I've always said that the system is corrupt, it's broken, that powerful lawyer legislators manipulate it for the benefit of their clients. But you're here to say that none of that's true, correct?
I don't know that I'm here to say none of that's true. I'm here because I think that the conversation is deeper and wider than maybe you've given it credit for. There are problems, no doubt, okay? The system's not perfect. And the system in South Carolina by which we appoint judges or elect judges is not perfect. And I know you hate it, and that's fine. And there will always be abuses and there will always be problems. But what I have not seen you do in articles or in talking or just in conversations with you about the problem, what I have not seen you do is kind of look a little bit deeper. So yes, the judges are front and center, right? They're the ones out there with this target on their back, visible to the public, story in the newspaper. Here's Judge so-and-so giving, this criminal a slap on the wrist.
Hold on a second,
Okay.
Allie. Let's, I don't want to disrupt your train of thought,
Sure.
but they're not. Unless it's on FITSNews, who's calling them out? They're not getting called out in the State or the Post and Courier or the Greenville News or on the nightly newscast. Who's calling them out other than me?
If you want to have that, you can. That's fine.
Okay. I'm sorry. But you're right. They are the ones who are visible making the decisions.
They're most visible. And let me just start by saying that I work with these judges on a daily basis. I get to know a lot of them personally. A lot of them have been around for a lot of years. And as a general rule, and I would say pretty much across the board, I can't think of a single one in South Carolina that I would say this doesn't apply to. These are good, decent, hardworking people that want to do the right thing. These are people who could make a hell of a lot more money working in private practice as lawyers, but have instead chosen the route of public service. And what I don't believe, what I refuse to believe, is that we have judges in South Carolina who are beholden to the legislatures that appoint them to their positions, to the point that they will violate the judicial oath that they take when they take office. And at the expense of their licenses, their careers, their reputations. That I refuse to believe.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are there problems? Of course there are problems. Are there certain cases that you might pick on or write an article about that don't seem quite right to us? Of course. Yes, at first glance. Something like with what you wrote about Judge Price the other day, for example, that gentleman that I think had multiple issues going on with some domestic violence charges. What I'm trying to do is to say, let's stop. Let's take a deeper look. Let's widen the camera lens a little bit, and let's stop focusing so much on the little tiny bit that we see and ask the questions about what else is going on, what else is at play, because there are problems, again, and they're deeper. They're wider. They're more complicated. They're more nuanced than you're giving it credit for. We don't have judges running amok doing the bidding of legislatures all over the state. I'm sorry. I don't believe that.
Okay.
I don't believe that. I think that we have good, hardworking judges that are doing the best they can with what they're handed. And I'm going to pick on everybody a little bit for a second, okay? But I'm also going to give everybody a little bit of credit. So let's take, for example, the issue of judges who let someone out on bond when maybe that person is accused of a violent crime, okay? Who's prosecuting that case? An assistant solicitor in some circuit, right? Who, again, for the most part, are good, hardworking people who have gone into public service for a reason, okay? And for the most part, prosecutors across the state, I work with these people every day, have good relationships with them. These are good, hardworking people that want to do the right thing, that want to do justice, okay? Who's giving them those cases to prosecute? Law enforcement, police officers, who, again, are there, just like there might be a few judges who, and I'm not saying in South Carolina, but in general, could a judge potentially be corrupt? Of course he or she could, just like a prosecutor could be corrupt. Back up. Who hands the prosecutors the cases? Police. Are there bad police officers? Sure, because good police officers will tell you there are bad police officers, and hopefully they distance themselves from them. But for the most part, are the police trying to do the right thing? Are they getting up in the morning trying to do a job and to do it well and to keep the community safe? I think so. I do. Okay. Are there systemic problems that feed into the policing problem that we have in America? Yes, you might disagree with me on that, but I believe there are. But for the most part, okay, let's take those groups of people, okay? Let's take law enforcement who originate these criminal cases. Let's take the prosecutors who then have to take them to court. And then let's take judges who have to ultimately do something with it, okay? There may be times where law enforcement does a sloppy job, or they might cut corners, or they just might not have information available to them that might make the case a little bit better. And that may be through no fault of their own. But they're going to hand that case to the prosecutor, and they're going to say, here you go, prosecute this case. That prosecutor might look at that case and be like, man, this thing is kind of a steaming pile of you know what. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. What's that prosecutor going to do? Let me stick that to the side, and maybe we'll deal with that later, right? So what happens? Let's not forget that in this entire process, there's a person, okay? That person might be an accused criminal, but it's a person, okay? Let's say it's your brother. Okay, I don't even know if you have a brother.
I do.
Okay, let's say it's your brother who's accused of a violent crime. That case, maybe the prosecutor sees a few problems with it. He or she's going to set it to the side, and nothing's going to happen with it. Your brother doesn't get a bond initially, so he's sitting in jail. Months pass. Sometimes years pass. Let's say your brother doesn't have a job. He doesn't have money. He doesn't have a family. You don't want to bail him out because you don't like him very much, okay? And he's just sitting there in jail. And this case gets to be 6 months old, and then a year old, and then 18 months old. And then your brother's public defender might say, listen, I'm trying to get something done in this case. This guy either needs to go to trial or you need to let him out of jail. He can't sit here this whole time. He hasn't even had a trial yet. We don't even know if he's guilty of this thing that we've accused him of doing. And so that lawyer might file a motion to set bond. And then who gets it? The judge. The judge doesn't know anything about this case, okay? Contrary to what maybe the public will believe, the judge doesn't get a copy of the file to read through what's going on. The judge takes a seat on the bench and says, okay, there's a motion on the docket for bond. Mr. Solicitor, Madam Defense Attorney, tell me what this is all about. And then he hears the case and decides, should that person get a bond? Well, here's the conundrum. The judge might say, well, this person's accused of a violent crime. What does that judge have to balance? The judge has to balance the risk that that person would flee and not show up to court and the danger to the public and letting this person out, but also has to balance the fact that this person has not been found guilty. This is not a punitive incarceration at this point. This is pretrial detention. So he's got to balance all those interests and say, why hasn't this case gone to trial? Well, who makes that decision? Well, that's kind of complicated, right? But the solicitor, maybe. I mean, it's complicated. Docket control, that's a totally separate issue for another day. The judge might look at the prosecutor and say, is the state ready for trial? And in the back of that prosecutor's mind, they're like, man, law enforcement handed me this steaming pile of what. What the hell am I supposed to do with this case? Judge, we're not ready for trial. And maybe the prosecutor's waiting on information from law enforcement. Maybe law enforcement's waiting on information from elsewhere. Again, there are layers to this. And so this is why I'm saying don't just look at the one little piece involving the judge. There are layers to all of this. So when the prosecutor says we're not ready for trial, what is the judge supposed to do? Just say, well, that's okay. We can hold this innocent until and unless proven guilty person in jail in perpetuity until what? Until the prosecutor decides that they're going to pick up that steaming pile of what and take it to trial, or maybe they're going to dismiss it, or maybe they're going to make a plea offer. What is the judge going to do? So maybe the judge sets a bond, and maybe the bond's set at $50,000, $75,000. Well, if you've got money, you can pay that. If you don't, you can't. That's a separate issue. But then what's the paper going to do? What's FITSNews going to do to that judge? They're going to say, look at Judge so-and-so letting an accused murderer out on the street. But what has the paper, what has FITSNews not taken into account? Haven't backed up to all of the other entities that play a role in why we got to where we got. Why that judge was handed something and asked to do something with it that he knew a whole lot of nothing about, was not privy to all of the background information, and only has the question of, if this case, if the prosecution's not ready to go to trial, then that judge is going to say, okay, then the remedy is to let this person out on bond. You can't just hold people in pretrial detention into perpetuity and not make a move. Somebody has to make a move. And if the prosecutor's not going to make the move for whatever reason, and I'm not knocking the prosecutors. Listen, the docket is a disaster, and they have more cases that they can handle than they can handle. But when the judge gets that, and we're vilifying the judge for doing his or her job, we're not being honest about the entire picture. We're not being honest about the full problem.
That's fair.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. And, you make a good point with regard to the folks who are in jail, as you said, in perpetuity without, a determination as to guilt. It almost, the old expression, shit or get off the pot if you're the prosecutor.
Yep.
They do need to make that decision. You can't have people sitting in jail forever. And I do want to point out one of the things you said. One of the things I'm very proud of at our news outlet, I think we're the only out in the state that does this. Any arrest for a crime, we have a paragraph, we put it into every story. As with anyone convicted or accused of any crime, this person is considered innocent until proven guilty by our criminal justice system. We put that in every story.
I don't think you get a lollipop for that, though, Will. I'm sorry.
Fair enough.
I think that's just.
God, you're stingy with the lollipops over here. I don't think
you get a prize for that. I think that's just. I think that's the right thing to do.
Let me ask you this then: what about the reporting we've done on docket reform and the issues with the docket? I mean, because you're bringing up a point that's one of the things that I've raised is who's in charge of it. The court took it away from the prosecutors, didn't they? So the judges.
In theory, they did, but in reality, in practice,
who should control it?
That's complicated. So there are a couple counties in South Carolina that have a true Langford or a judge-run docket, and they're.
And tell people just real quick, docket is
the moving of cases,
scheduling,
right? The scheduling of cases for trial, the management of motions, controlling the roster of cases that come before the court. There is much dispute about whether the judges, the chief administrative judge, should do that, whether the prosecutors should do that. And there's not a perfect system, but there's a lot of confusion in the state about where that power lies. And there's been a lot of back and forth, and there've been a lot of experiments from circuit to circuit. But for the most part, I think the big thing is not to lose sight of the fact that we don't have a bunch of evil, power-hungry, ill-intentioned people sitting, up in their judicial towers trying to make everybody's lives hell and to try to be corrupt and to try to do bad things. And unfortunately, I think sometimes that's a little bit of how you make it seem. And again, I think that that's dishonest because it's not taking into account the full picture of how complicated all of this is, because it is. It's complicated. And there are just so many things that factor into why we are where we are with the docket. There are so many things that factor into why we are where we are with issues that you point out with sentencing or bonds. It's complicated. And what I think is important is to have the full conversation and not just focus on vilifying judges who are exercising their discretion and doing their job and being handed oftentimes an impossible situation and expected to make something of it. And I don't mean for that to fall, the guilt for that to fall immediately on the next step in on the staircase, which is the prosecutors, because they're also trying the best they can. Okay. And same thing with law enforcement. I think they're trying the best they can. But the system has problems, no doubt. But when we focus on, or when we vilify judges, when we focus on the things that we think are going wrong or that are being done incorrectly, and we're not being honest about why we're pointing that out, and maybe you can tell me why you're pointing that out. And maybe we'll start there because I think I have a response to that. But what is your goal in pointing these things out? Because I'll say I think transparency is important, right? It's important for the public to kind of have a view into this world and to know that if they or someone they love is caught up in the criminal justice system, that things are going to operate efficiently, fairly, ethically. That is important, right? The integrity of the system depends in part on the public's trust in that system. And so I think the big issue that I have with some of your reporting is that it feels like the stoking of outrage for the purpose of stoking outrage. Okay. It feels as though we're not trying to say we are identifying the problems and we're proposing solutions to the end of having a more perfect system. It feels like a very popular thing right now is people who peddle in the currency of outrage, right? Everybody loves a good scandal. Everybody loves a roast of a public official. But what is the end goal, right? So if we are doing nothing but pointing out in what I would say is a dishonest, in a very, I don't know how I want to say it, but we're not looking at the full picture. And all we're doing is sowing seeds of distrust in the system. Then we're not actually fixing the problem. As a matter of fact, we're making it worse. I think I've told you this before, and I know you didn't like when I said this, but I don't even want to say his name, but when Donald Trump challenged, I guess that was the kind word, okay, the integrity of the election system, right?
Right.
He was doing so to sow seeds of distrust in the public in the integrity of the system. And it feels as though sometimes when you write articles like the ones that you wrote about Judge Price, or when you pick on Judge Lee or Judge Benjamin, I'm just trying to go down the list of people you've picked on in the past. I don't know, there may be others.
It's lengthy.
But when you do that, it feels as though you are doing the same thing to public confidence in the judicial system that Donald Trump did to public confidence in the election system. And what I will say to that is I believe that irreparable damage was done by Donald Trump, that there will never be a time where there aren't people who distrust the system, not based on any evidence, but because somebody said so and because they stoked that outrage or because they made that challenge. And so when you're doing things like focusing on these problems that you perceive with judges, and it feels as though it's being done for political purposes or maybe to get clicks. I don't know what it's for. It's not actually doing anything to solve problems, because we do have problems in the criminal justice system, not just in South Carolina, but everywhere. But if we truly wanted to solve the problems with the criminal justice system, I believe that we would be having a more honest conversation about what brings people to the criminal justice system in the first place. And we would be having a more honest conversation about why the public doesn't have buy-in or investment in things that we know reduce the number of people who are funneled into the criminal justice system. Like we would invest in education. We would make healthcare accessible and affordable. We're not investing
in education in this state.
More
than $17,000 per kid per year in a government-run system that continues to rank at or near the bottom in every metric that matters, but we're not investing in education in this state? I'm sorry. I mean, I don't mean to be a dishonest vilifier and clickbait whore in raising that point, but am I wrong?
That we're investing in education, I think we need to do better, right? But if the conversation is not for the purpose of how can we do better, how can we make this better, same thing goes for education. Let's have the conversation, right? Just like we're having the conversation about the criminal justice system. Is the goal to make it better? Is the goal to find solutions, or is the goal to stoke outrage? Because there's a difference, and that difference matters so very much. It matters so very much because if the public loses all confidence in the judicial system, just as it has in many ways lost confidence in the electoral system, our criminal justice system can't work. It can't work if people have no buy-in, no confidence. They don't believe that it's fair.
Right.
Just like, what the hell are the elections going to look like moving forward? I don't even know. But it's the same concept. So if we don't want to have a conversation about solutions, then by all means, I think it's politically expedient to keep pointing out problems and to keep vilifying judges, but we're not having an honest conversation about why we're here. And that is important.
Let's do that because, again, and one thing I do want to point out, the Bentley Price column was not about somebody who was accused, detained indefinitely. This was somebody who pled guilty to some absolutely heinous crimes against women, literally holding this woman by her head as he punched her face after she's on the ground, stomping on her head on the ground. This is someone who the prosecutor and the victims asked for a minimum of 6 years. A minimum of 6 years. This was a person with multiple DV crimes on their record before this latest round of crimes. So this was not somebody sitting in jail indefinitely who the facts of the case were in dispute. This was someone who had pled to the facts of the case. So here's the other thing I want to get into. We're talking about fixing the system, and you've alleged that I don't really care about that I just want to kind of stoke outrage to get clicks. And that's fair point.
How it seems. I'm not,
how it seems, but fair point.
Yeah,
but let's talk about that, because one of the things I've tried to do over the years is to host a conversation about reform.
Yeah.
Last fall, I published a very lengthy article suggesting a reform, the public election of judges. I threw that out there as a conversation piece more than anything. But I wanted to tell you, I had lunch yesterday with a lawmaker who was actually very nervous about your appearance, because I think that they'd seen so many of the lawyer legislators try to justify the system and end up with egg on their faces. But one of the conversations that I had with this lawmaker, they're a leader in the House of Representatives, somebody who has influence on what that Judiciary Committee there is going to do, what they're going to pass out. But they made the point, Will, if the system that we currently have, again, legislative screening, legislative election of judges, if we can make that work to the point that these cases like the Bentley Price case, like the Bowen Turner case.
Don't call it the Bentley Price case.
I'll call it. No. But if their point was this, if we can make that system work, are you okay with it? Do we have to change it or can we fix it? And I said, listen, if these victims are getting the justice they deserve, I really don't give a shit what the system that led to it, who appoints who has advice and consent, which lawmakers are. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me, you ask why I do it. I do it because I believe that these victims are getting screwed. They're getting screwed. And if people want to be outraged by that, that's great. If they want to come click on my site to be outraged about it, that's great. But my point is to point out a fundamental injustice and to try to do something about it.
And I respect that. and I hope that we can always take steps and have conversations in furtherance of the goal of being better, because we owe it to the victims of crime, just like we owe it to the accused, just like we owe it to judges and to prosecutors to make this system efficient, ethical, and functional. We do. We owe it to all parties in the system to do that. But, as far as the case, and I hate to keep calling it the Bentley Price case. I apologize.
Oh, yeah,
I don't recall the defendant's name, nor do I know anything.
Casey Lee Combs.
Okay, Casey Lee Combs. Nor do I know anything about the case beyond what may have been contained in the article that I may or may not have read. But back to my original point, there are very rarely times where something so outrageous happens without a reason, right?
Okay.
So there may be things, and this is what I just really want to point out, because the general public, doesn't see the way the sausage is made, as we say. There may be serious problems with that case for whatever reason. And I don't know if that's true or not. But what I can tell you is that oftentimes when there's an article published in the paper followed by public outrage that someone didn't get the sentence that they thought, that the public thought that person should get, more often than not, there's something else at play that's not been made part of the conversation. And that's why I think having the whole conversation is so important. Because while Judge Price may not have done what everybody thought Judge Price should have done, Judge Price may have been privy to information that maybe wasn't contained in that article. Judge Price may have been privy to information that we don't know about. There may have been problems with that case that may have led to his decision to do what he did. I don't know. But what I do know is we have good people that are appointed to sit as independent, fair judges in these cases, and to and have the ability to and the responsibility to exercise their discretion. And what I don't believe is that we have a bunch of bad people who are just doing the bidding of the legislators that appoint them for the purpose of what? I don't. That's the part I'm really struggling with, is that I don't believe that it's this evil empire of people beholden to the legislators that appoint them. I think that our judges are good people who are often vilified because we're not having the whole conversation about what's going on.
Well, let's dive into that a little bit. Why, you said to what end? And I think one of the things that we found out in covering the Casey Lee Combs case, a.k.a. the Bentley Price case, one of the things we found out was it one of the lawyer legislators who immediately and reflexively spoke up in Judge Price's defense is a guy named Leon Stavronakis. He's a Democratic lawmaker from Charleston, South Carolina. And it turns out we were able to uncover this. This guy's appeared before Judge Price 6 times in the last couple of years on bond revocation hearings where the state has said an accused criminal has violated the terms of their bond and should be put in jail. Again, not people who are being held indefinitely against their will, people who were put back on the streets, who then violated the terms of their bond by committing additional crimes. So the prosecutors go to this judge 6 times for clients of this lawmaker. And guess how many cases the state won? None. So one of the folks who was watching this process came to me and said, "Who are you going to hire? If you got a bond revocation hearing in front of this judge, who are you going to hire? You're going to hire this powerful lawyer legislator." So there's an incentive for these lawyers. They've got a market advantage over you, over other attorneys, because they've got power over that judge's position, over that judge's salary, over that judge's office budget. It seems to me a corrupt arrangement. You don't agree?
I don't think that the system is perfect. But again, back to my point, do I believe that judges are out there playing favorites with legislators, compromising their position as judges, they're violating their oath that they take? No, I don't believe that. I've not had that experience in South Carolina. I'm not saying my experience is the only experience. And obviously I'm not a legislator, so maybe I'm just not getting treatment that I would otherwise. I don't know. I'm sorry, Will. I don't believe that. Okay. I know these people. I've worked with these people. We have good, decent, hardworking judges in this state who are put in the impossible position of being handed these grenades sometimes, having to do something with it, and then facing the backlash in the newspaper of a very small portion of the story being told. And then also we forget these judges can't really speak up in their own defense, okay? They're not supposed to make comments to the public. They're not supposed to make public comments that can affect the outcome of a case. And so essentially what we're doing is we're tying both of their hands behind their back, we're blindfolding them, we're pulling them out into the public square, and we're beating the shit out of them. and we're not being honest. We're not having the whole conversation. We're not telling the whole story. And so I hear your concerns. I think those are valid concerns. Obviously, we always have work to do, and I think that we should always be working towards a better system and making improvements so that it's fair across the board for everyone, because I think that also works to make the system have more integrity, which will then in turn allow the public to feel more confidence in the system. But at the end of the day, it's that conversation I think is so important. It's making sure that we're looking at the whole picture before we're just kind of honing in and attacking judges for things that we're not talking about the whole of the problem. Yeah.
So you tell me you have faith in South Carolina's justice system. You believe it operates, as you said, efficiently, fairly.
I think that there are improvements to be made. I mean, listen, I have faith in this. I have faith in this country. I have faith in democracy. I have faith in the system. I also have big problems with the system. Okay, I work in the criminal justice system every day. I roll my sleeves up and I get down and dirty in it on a day-to-day basis. And it is not perfect. It is an imperfect system built by imperfect people, sometimes with imperfect motives. And I recognize that. But what is the alternative? I think that we always have to be working towards improvement. And going in with a blowtorch and setting the whole thing on fire without having solutions proposed.
Well, you didn't like my public election solution, did you? Well, you chuckled at it a moment ago, did you not?
I chuckled at it because I have spoken to lawyers from in states where judges are elected by the public, and that also comes with its problems. Okay,
Agreed.
There's no. If there was a perfect solution, everyone would be doing it, or at least I hope they would. So there isn't a perfect solution. What I'm saying is this is the system that we have, and it is very important, I think, to have people who disagree sit down and have an honest conversation. I want to understand your perspective and your concerns, because I believe that your perspective and your concerns are shared by members of the public. I want for you to understand my perspective and my concerns as somebody who works, like I said, kind of in the trenches every day. And I think that once those conversations happen, and if they happen more frequently in an open way where, I'm not trying to call you names, like I think you said click whore or something. You said it. I did it.
Well, you were denying me lollipops at the time. So
well, because you kind of wanted a prize for doing the right thing, and I'm just not into that. But I think that this is the important part. Is the conversation and doing it in an honest way. Because at the end of the day, you can make a judge a bad guy. I can say the judge is a good guy, but we need to be looking at the full picture.
Well, what was the first thing I told you when you, I think it was over text, when you were a little less charitable in your critiques over our text exchanges. Sometimes you're a little more blunt in your criticism, but what was one of the first things I said? I said, let's get on camera and talk about it, because you're absolutely right. If people, like you said, you wanted to know why I'm saying what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I want to know why, you have that faith in the current system. And I think, like you say, if we sit down and talk about it, if we fumble towards solutions, that's where we're going to end up serving those victims and serving, again, that ultimate goal of having a justice system that we can have faith in and trust.
Yeah. And our motives matter too, right? Because not to change the subject, but to your point, what would have been your desired outcome and I already forgot the defendant's name, and I'm not going to say the Bentley Price case. Casey Combs. What do you think was the right result in that case? Let's start there.
All right. I think that when you have a prosecutor, when you have victims who are suggesting what they believe to be a reasonable sentence based on the facts of the case as admitted by the defendant and based on that defendant's prior history, I think that what they asked for was more than reasonable, particularly, as you know, let's assume that they gave him the low end of that sentence. Let's assume it was 6 years. It's going to be 85% of that, whatever that is, 4.5 years. So again, he was facing a 14-year. The law said he should have gone to jail for 14 years the moment he pled guilty.
That's not what the law says. The law says that's what the judge has discretion.
Fair enough. Okay.
We don't have mandatory sentencing guidelines.
Another thing we probably disagree on, I think we should have mandatory minimums, particularly on crimes like this.
I think we cannot incarcerate our way out of problems. We have so many people in prison in this country. It's outrageous. I think it's something like, since the 1970s, the United States prison population, I think, has grown by something outrageous, like 500%.
But not in South Carolina. SCDC population is down by 10,000 over the last decade.
Will, are we safer?
No.
Are there fewer people being funneled into the criminal justice system as a result of this incarceration obsession that we have? Are we safer?
We are not safer, and I would argue it's because we have the same in each town and city in South Carolina, depending on the population, whether it's Columbia with maybe it's the same 100 people. You go over to Calhoun, maybe it's the same 5 people. The same reoffenders who are being turned back on the street again and again and again. And law enforcement, you talked about law enforcement. The feds have actually had to come and step in and start enforcing some of these gun laws because the state judges won't do it. In fact, we talked about Bentley Price. There's a federal case where a guy shot a 9-year-old kid in Charleston while on a bond that Bentley Price gave him for other violent crimes. And that's my point. How many times do people have to show you who they are before we believe them and before the system starts holding them accountable?
Why are we holding judges accountable for defendant behavior?
Because the judge let them out after being shown again and again who and what they were. At some point, when are judges allowed to exercise common sense? And
at what point should
cases?
The public exercise common sense and think, why does this keep happening? Because what are we doing? What are you wanting the judge to do? You want the judge to put this person in jail.
Correct.
You want the judge to throw them in prison. But that's
Correct.
happening at a rate higher in this point in history than ever before, higher in this country than anywhere else. But are we safer? Is it stopping the problem? Or, as you said, does this keep happening over and over? At what point are we not the nuts who are doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome? So I think part of this conversation, too, needs to be about why is what we are doing not working? Or are we being dishonest about why we're doing it?
Mm-hmm.
What is the real reason? Are we throwing people in jail? Are we such an incarceration-obsessed society because we truly believe that it's going to make our communities safer, because we truly believe it's going to rehabilitate people? Or do we have some other motive?
What do you think the motive is then?
I think that's very complicated, and that's a conversation for another day.
Fair enough.
But I think one thing is really clear: what we're doing ain't working.
Well, we agree there. That's for damn sure. Although I would argue that the dramatic reduction in the prison population in South Carolina is contributing to that rise in violent crime. I don't think it's because we're locking up more people, because we're not. We're not. In South Carolina, we are not locking up more people.
I think if we want to know why crime rates are increasing, it's not about because we're letting people out of prison, right? Because if prison was working, people would be...
We're not putting them in the first place.
But we are. We are.
Okay.
We are. And we're putting them in there for a long time.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm not, listen, some people, if you talk about, if we want to get real philosophical, okay, you talk about what are the purposes of punishment, okay? There are a few main ones, to rehabilitate people, to provide deterrence, both to them personally and to other people who might commit a similar crime, to incapacitate them. Some people need to be cut off from society because they're dangerous, right? And then retribution or punishment.
Okay.
So are any of those purposes of punishment actually accomplishing the goals that we claim that we have in throwing people in jail, which is to keep the community safe? Is that happening? Are we safer?
And again,
do we have fewer people out there committing crimes? Or perhaps maybe are we looking at it the wrong way?
Well, I would argue, Al, and again, you make a good point, but I would argue that if our SCDC population would go from where it is currently, I don't know, it's 14,000. I think they had it about 25,000 at one point back in the late 2000s. But I would argue you put those extra 10,000 people in jail, we might be a little safer. So
your solution is to throw more people in prison, more incarceration.
More violent criminals? Absolutely. I believe if more violent criminals are off the street and behind bars, we will be safer.
Will, why can't the conversation be, how can we have fewer violent criminals?
Well, I think that's an important conversation too. And we talked about education a little while ago. And you said we weren't doing enough for it. What if we went to an Arizona-style model of choice in education? And because, by the way, Allie, let me tell you who started school choice. It's not a bunch of rich white folks sending their kids to Hammond. It was the daughter of a black sharecropper in Milwaukee who said, this public system is failing black kids. We are going to take it over. That's who started the school choice movement in this country.
I think if we have a conversation about why people are being arrested, charged, and convicted of crimes that is placing them in the prison population in the first place, and we try to address the root cause, that the other stuff will follow. But what I'm hearing you say is that we will fix our crime problem by throwing more people in prison, when we know for a fact that throwing more people in prison actually can increase recidivism rates. Then I think that that's dishonest.
Okay, and that's fair enough. But I think if you...
Why not address the root of the problem? We have children living in poverty. We have people who don't have good access to health care. We have people who have access to health care that's too expensive. We have people who don't finish school. The quality of their education is not good. And I know you want to go off on school choice. I'm not going there today. Okay. I can tell you that. But
another time. We'll have another.
Maybe another time. But why shouldn't the conversation be to keep people from going into this system in the first place, rather than how to triage it or how to deal with it once they get there?
That's fair enough.
And I think that a lot of times judges also recognize that we have this exploding prison population, and it feels like this vicious cycle of just another day, another, however many people going to prison and then some coming out. And it's this cycle of around and around we go, and nothing's changing.
Once again, I hate to point out, the judges in South Carolina, they know we don't have an exploding prison population. They know that it has been reduced by more than 50% over the last decade. They know that.
Prison isn't doing its job.
Because we're not putting violent criminals in prison now.
That's not why. That is absolutely not why. That's not why.
Fair enough.
And I think that if we were open to solutions to the problem of how people end up in the criminal justice system in the first place, rather than trying to grease the pipes and just, push them in and out faster, that that we would be better served overall, that communities would be safer, that society would be safer. But I don't actually think that's what people want. I don't think that the general public reads an article about whatever his name is and thinks.
You mean the Bentley Price case? We've been talking about?
I do not. I don't think that they read that and they want for somebody like that gentleman to go to prison because they think that's gonna fix the problem. I think they just want that person to go away, and some people do. Again, incapacitation is one of the purposes of punishment, right? Some people just need to be incapacitated. Not making any comment on that case one way or the other. I don't know a thing about it. But I do wonder sometimes, what is our motivation? And I think that's a good conversation to have. That's a good, honest conversation to have. What is our motivation in, like you, for example, taking the position that the solution to our problem is that not enough people are going to prison?
That's one solution.
Okay. What are the others?
Again, fixing the education system so that folks are able to find gainful employment, have incomes, provide for their families without having to steal. And then when they're getting caught stealing, maybe shooting somebody. I mean, it all starts, like you said. I don't disagree with you. And again, I'm not one of these big government liberals, all these social programs or whatever, but I do think that if we fix the underlying problems, like you said, we will reduce that cycle, break that cycle.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Not into big social programs, but prison's big business too. They say crime shouldn't pay.
Wow.
Crime pays. Crime pays. It's probably not you and I might disagree about who it pays, but we're getting off track. But
no, that's fair. I'm a cops and courts
we
libertarian.
We put our money where we put our money to what matters. And so I would love to see an honest conversation in South Carolina and in the United States. I would like to see an honest conversation about what our motives are, what our priorities are. If we truly want to address crime, we have to address other issues. And we may very much disagree about what those issues are, but kids without clean water, kids without access to good education, people without access to health care, policing problems, all of those things. If we would take the money that we pump into the factory of incarceration in this country and in this state, then we might actually see some change. But in order to get there, we have to have the conversation about why we're doing what we're doing. And that's the conversation I think a lot of people aren't necessarily prepared to have.
Well, we're going to have to go through the state budget line by line next time you come in so we can look at that SCDC budget versus, say, the $1 billion we throw toward higher ed and professors of Sanskrit, wokeism. But we'll talk about that on the next time you come. But I do want to say this, Allie, and this is the best compliment I could pay to anybody. The things that you've said here today make me think about what I write. They stay in my head when I go back in that office and get in front of that computer and I think, wait a minute, Allie said something about that and she's got a point. And the fact that, like you said, we're able to have these conversations, but that's the best compliment I could ever give anybody, is that what you say makes me think. It makes me stop and think. And so the fact you're willing to come on here, this
probably
is
going to take a lot of hell for this, just so you know.
I don't think so. I think you more than held your own. In fact, I think the scorecards probably got. What are we scoring the fight? No, I'm just kidding. Not a fight. Discussion.
I want you to, again, a wide angle lens, more so than a zoom. And I feel like you've been really zoomed in on our judges. And again, this isn't about like Allie's coming here to defend the judges. I love them. They're good people.
Sure.
Work with them. I respect the hell out of all of them. But
you're defending the integrity of the system.
It's important. I just don't want to have cheap shots taken at the expense of the entire system, because again, I think the damage can be irreparable. I don't want to see that happen. I don't think that's good for anyone. And I really just want for the public, for people like you, for journalists, I want for us to have the whole conversation. I want for us to look at it. And to be honest with you, I think judges, and I don't want to speak for judges, but I bet you they want that too. Because again, we've taken them out in the public square with their hands behind their back blindfolded, and we've beat the hell out of them. They can't defend themselves. And I wasn't trying to vilify prosecutors either. They're doing the best they can, and they've been handed difficulty just like, law enforcement has. But again, can we step back, widen that lens, and really have a conversation about all of the factors that play into the situation that we're in. And yes, you have examples like the one that you gave, just like you're going to have examples like I think you picked on Judge Lee for the bakery murders years back. I mean, things like that. But when we're looking more at the whole picture rather than just focusing on the judge and one decision that we think is made in a vacuum that I promise you isn't, then I think that we'll have a better understanding of why we are where we are. And we'll have better ideas for common sense solutions about how to make it better. Because it's not perfect. I'm not saying it's perfect. But I do not believe that it is broken beyond repair in South Carolina. I do not believe that we have judges that are doing anything but their best in upholding their oaths with what they're handed. With the inability to defend themselves, with the inability to have people look at that whole picture. And that is so, so important. I think I've said that like 1,400 times today because it is. It's important. And it's what's been missing. And that's the problem, is that the whole picture has been missing. Let's look at the whole thing because prosecutors want help too. They want help to know what to do with this exploding docket, that there's no way in hell they could put all these cases up for trial. Why can't we empower them to do things with their cases without the fear of public backlash? Can you imagine what would happen if a prosecutor got a case and said, man, this thing's a loser? Law enforcement, for whatever reason, through maybe no fault of their own, they've handed me a C- case and now they want me to make an A+ out of it. And I can't. Let's empower them to manage the docket. Let's empower judges to do the same. And let's, instead of putting these players in the system, the judges, the prosecutors, the law enforcement officials, let's empower them to make better cases, to prosecute the good cases, to get rid of the crap so that they're not handing the judge the crap and then allowing the judge to take the heat for it on the back end in the newspaper. That's a conversation we also need to have. And right now that's not happening. And I promise you it's desperately needed. It's probably desperately wanted. It needs to happen. But if prosecutors make the wrong decision, again, they're in the newspaper. They're not being tough enough on crime. And people love that. Tough on crime, law and order, buzzwords.
Well, once again, I don't see much of that in my competition in the mainstream press, but fair point. But you said something earlier that I think is really important. You talked about a better understanding. And I think that, again, that's why you being willing to do this matters. Because as I said earlier, you give me a better understanding of it. You give our audience a better understanding of it. So I hope you're always willing to come on and have these kind of back and forth because they matter. And being able to do it in a way that we walk away saying, I respect, don't agree, but respect.
Oh, you still don't agree? I haven't done a good job.
You got to bring lollipops.
I thought I was coming in here to change your mind.
You see, if you feed me the lollipop, just, I'm like a child. You got to, you got kids, just think that way. Will you come back?
Sure. Yeah. Will you stop writing crappy articles about our judges and picking on them for no reason?
So I didn't change your mind either.
Nah, not really.
Not really?
No, I kid, but I think the conversation's important. I hope that it keeps happening. I hope that people who truly have an interest in making the system better rather than just, walking around outraged, because I do think that some people just like to walk around outraged, and it's very popular right now, right? Like we're not happy unless we're enraged or outraged about something. But, people who really do want to make it better, come to court, watch court. It's open. Come see what we do every day. Come watch the whole picture. Don't just Don't just talk to the solicitor's office. Talk to the defense attorney. Figure out what's going on. I mean, we can, all of us, we can only say so much.
Sure.
But when we get the full picture, we have a better understanding and more appreciation of how things end up the way that they end up. And then we can also have more honest conversations about how to fix things, how to make them better. And that's what's really important. It should be.
No, it is. And again, I hope you feel that this was at the very least an honest conversation.
I was honest.
On your part, right? I see how it is.
Yeah. No, I think you were honest too. I respect your thoughts. I think it's important that everything be put out there. Yeah. And I hope that I will maybe see more of that if I start reading FITSNews. No promises.
Yes.
But I hope that I'll see more of that.
Well, again, like I said, best compliment I could ever give somebody. You give me a lot to think about. I think you're giving our audience a lot to think about too. It's definitely a perspective that they haven't gotten. So, and I would offer this to you. If you've got, I know there's probably 5 or 6 other people in the state that probably agree with you on this. You want to find them and get them to, we got an open mic. They can submit guest columns in defense of these judges.
Maybe I'm the test case. We'll see how much holy hell I will have rained down on me for this.
You won't get hell for this.
Yeah.
Who will get mad at you for?
I hope nobody, because I want things to be better, and I want for there to be honest and productive and respectful discourse around the issues that we have, not just in the criminal system, the criminal justice system in South Carolina, but nationwide, because we have problems. We have problems, but it's not irredeemable. And the most important part is the conversation.
Absolutely.
It's the most important part.
And I don't think there's anybody that's going to be mad at you for engaging that conversation, or they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Because it's important, and your willingness to do it means a lot to me, means a lot to our audience. And Allie, I'm just grateful you were willing to do this. And anytime you see me veering out of the line from your perspective, I have no doubt I will.
Oh, yeah, I'll get you.
But if it ever again bubbles up to a point you feel you want to come, this chair, this mic.
No, this was your idea.
Fair enough. But always available,
Yes.
always on. And again, not just you, anybody watching this, you got to take on it. Let us know. I mean, this is why we're here. I believe what I believe. I believe it passionately, but the thing I believe above all else is that I don't have a monopoly on the truth. That's why this mic is always open. So I'm glad you took us up on the invitation. I hope you'll do it again in the future, particularly after people see how well you did. Not that I'm a particularly tough sparring opponent, but you've articulated your positions incredibly well, and I'm grateful for you being willing to do that with our audience.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Allie Benevento, everybody. We'll have her back soon.